your search. Thanks a lot.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much because you engaged in the discussions previously that was quite interesting uh, and I used to our convener said hello to you, Raphael, Professor
Hello.
Patnaik sir.
Hi. Hello. It
Professor
was
Patnaik, can you unmute?
Oh, sorry, I had muted it. No, I was saying, how are you?
you
Raphael?
referring to me?
Yes.
Now, yeah, I'm good. Thanks for asking, and thanks a lot for, answering all my questions about
And
your your.
I remember I didn't answer one of your questions. That was
Ah,
about the article that you asked me specific point. I
oh
still have not,
yes.
I have still not read it to clarify what you asked. Have you got it clarified already?
I know I didn't have time to
Oh, okay.
read the article again, but I will read it, and if I don't understand it maybe properly,
Oh,
if you don't mind, like I may try to ask you again for some
please, I
explanation.
don't mind
And
at all. It was actually, I sort of left it to do it later and then I forgot.
no, Ahmed, it's understandable. It's you're very busy, so you're a
No, no,
professor and
no,
you
no,
give
it is not
lectures.
business. One just forgets. So when
Oh,
I
okay.
saw your name just now, I then remembered that I have not answered one of your questions.
Okay, so I'm happy that you, reminded yourself or remember this, the fact that you didn't answer. But you specifically told me, wrote that I should try to, I mean, get over again. To read it again and to see if by myself, I can try to
Okay,
understand it properly. But anyway, if you can read it and then can give me your explanation about the point I wrote about, I will be
okay,
very happy. Anyway, otherwise I'll try to do it by myself, and then if I cannot understand it, I will try to ask
okay,
for some explanation again. But
okay.
thanks for remembering. It was very uh, nice to you because then you remember that I
Oh,
was trying
you are
to.
welcome.
It was long time ago. I asked you long time ago, so thanks
Th-
again for remembering this.
Thank you. Um, just few seconds ago, I again emailed to Professor Subramanian. Mm. Though he pointed out that uh, he is less familiar with the technical things, but he assured me that Zoom is all right for him.
He is at a more advanced stage than me. I'm less familiar than him with the technical things, so he's probably
I just have it as an article of belief. I don't really know what it is. I just click on the link and hope that it works. To me, it's my fate whether it works or it doesn't work.
Uh, so almost 10 minutes has passed. So we are waiting for the speaker to join us. The speaker have not yet joined us. So those who joined lately, please please wait for some minutes. I hope Professor Subramanian will join us soon. Professor Patnaik sir, since may I request you something that can you please give an kindly give an overview of this whole study circle, individual well-being and social welfare, and how individual well-being is connected to social welfare, and uh, and the concept and the discussions we have, because we don't since we don't have any other choice to wait for Professor Subramaniam, and I already sent a mail to join us since we are waiting for him. But unfortunately, I don't have his cell phone number. So if I had that, I could call him up. Since
I also don't have.
Yes. So can you please say something on the journey we have so far?
Okay. Let me then speak until Professor Subramanian joins, and as soon as he comes, I shall stop there.
Okay. That's wonderful.
One thing I would like to emphasize in commenting on this study circle and about individual well-being, social welfare, etc., there is still it is I won't call it confusion, it is a interchange of frameworks while talking about these things. Sometimes they are not sufficiently distinguished. There are two distinct problems in this area. There are, of course, many problems, many distinctions and conceptual issues. One distinct problem is sometimes especially people from outside the area, those who are working in the area, of course, they will know, but people from outside, they tend to mix up two distinct issues. One is, if suppose I am trying to judge an individual's well-being or in social welfare, etc., then it is my personal judgment, it is my social welfare judgment about the society, or in discussing the society's welfare, what should be the role of individual well-being, etc. So it is my personal judgment. The other is, now we have talked and talked, we have argued, suppose I have expressed my personal judgment, you have expressed your personal judgment. Finally, there comes a time when the society has to take a decision after all the discussion has taken place. At the discussion stage, I am advancing my value judgments. Therefore, I have to defend myself. I can't appeal to say the democratic decision procedure. This is what the majority think, therefore I shall think that way. I have to defend my judgment on with my reasoning on the basis of my intuition. The other thing is, after we have discussed all this, finally the society has to take a decision. It can't go on talking about it forever. At that stage, we may appeal to democratic decision methods, whether majority decision method or something else. Now, there is frequently a confusion between the two problems. One is the arrow problem of aggregating individual opinions, our judgments. We have talked about it, we have argued about it. Now we are deciding what the society should do. That's the arrow problem. The other problem is very different. In the arrow problem, we have to talk about what the majority thinks. What is there an overwhelming majority which think this? That can be a justification. But when I'm saying, suppose pornography should be prohibited in the society, if I'm saying that, then I can't say the majority thinks that, therefore I'm saying that. I'm following the majority. If I am introducing that as my value judgment, then I have to defend with my reasoning about my judgment. The two are frequently intermixed. While talking about should be the role of individual well-being, how we should interpret individual well-being, and when people are asked sometimes, why do you say that we should interpret in this way? Frequently they say that, okay, look at the majority in the Indian society or the Bangladesh society or the British society. The majority thinks that that's completely irrelevant in that context. Majority may think one thing, but if I have introduced a value judgment, I have to defend it. And it can be done. It is not that it cannot be done. Frequently what is happening, whenever there is a difficulty in interpreting individual well-being in a particular way, it doesn't work or something, people immediately say that we shall resort to majority decision. That's a different problem. We can decide that. But first, let's say, if I'm saying that pornography should be prohibited, then I have to defend it by more primitive reasoning, not by appealing to the opinion of the majority. I would like to sharply distinguish these two things. One of the reasons I'm distinguishing, frequently what is happening when there is a problem, for example, I mentioned that in the context of interpersonal comparison of well-being, we still don't know what to do in the functioning and capability approach. We don't have any way of doing that. And faced with that problem, frequently people are switching immediately the argument, like, look, we can look up the majority opinion. We can go by that. If we are unable to agree over am I talking too much? I have Subramanian come back.
No,
So,
I again email him
okay.
and
So I was saying that my worry is, if we are talking about how we should interpret individual well-being, we have to do it from more primitive reasoning. We can't say that the society thinks this way, majority of people think this way. Therefore, I'm saying that's the different stage. That's the stage of social decision making. Now, this is a fundamental distinction which was first made by Ian Little. Ian Little, in a famous article that he wrote about Arrow's impossibility theorem. And he pointed out that, look, I am talking about my opinion, what I think, whereas Arrow is talking about the society, how we should talk about the decision making in the society. That is nothing to do with this problem. And after Ian Little clarified that, then next stage clarification came from famous welfare economist Abraham Bergson. He also pointed out the same thing in a slightly different way. And finally, Amartya Sen himself, clarified that in a beautiful article. I don't have the reference now, otherwise I would have liked to give it. First people didn't understand why Ian Little is objecting to raising the arrow impossibility on the contest. It is Amartya Sen's article which made it absolutely clear, incisively clear. And even then, the problem is still persisting. So when we are arguing about individual well-being, I am expected to give my justification. I can't appeal to society's majority decision and say that majority thinks that, therefore I am thinking that. I may not agree with the majority. I may have a very small brain, but that's the only thing that I have. I have to judge on the basis of that, and I have to provide reasoning on the basis of that. I can't appeal to majority decisions to justify my value judgment. That's one of the things that I noticed frequently gets confused. So that's why I thought I shall make this comment.
Right. And what is primitive reasoning?
Primitive reasoning.
Sorry, I'm sorry. That is the word you have used. No.
No, it is more primitive in the sense that if suppose I say that you should not smoke in the crowded room.
Oh,
So I
okay.
introduced the value judgment. Then somebody asked, why? Why are you saying that I should not smoke in the crowded room? Look, majority of people who are smoking in the crowded rooms. So why? Then I can say that, look, don't you care for the health of the people? If suppose I have a bad lungs, uh, I have bad lungs and I am severely affected by smoking in a crowded room, I'm attending the same meeting. Would you still say that we can smoke in the crowded room? Then somebody would say that, okay, in that case, shall make an exception. Now, okay, he makes an exception, said that, okay, if somebody is there with bad lungs, then we should not smoke in the crowded room. Then next, if I want to challenge, again, I have to go back to primitive reasoning. I can't say that, look, majority of people don't think we should smoke in a crowded room, and therefore we should not smoke in a crowded room. And if I want to do that, I have to provide, again, further justification of what I'm saying.
Right.
The, This is probably not the occasion to go into that. I don't know whether people in general are familiar with a book by, how can I forget that? It is about how we agree in science. Sorry, how we argue in science. Then one can say that's exactly similar sort of reasoning, not the same reasoning, but analogous, formally analogous reasoning exists in ethics also. If somebody is introducing an ethical judgment, somebody else questions it, you have to provide a counter example. You are saying X, would you insist on saying X, even if this is true? Now, suppose you can't agree, then he has to modify his opinion. The reasoning proceeds in that way in ethics.
Right.
I don't know if I've clarified the thing. Can I just go and look up the reference quickly? Because I have the book with.
Yes. Sure, sir. Sue, yes.
Yeah, maybe I can just help out and fill some of the awkward silence while we wait for the professor to turn up. Because we have been in the Flavio's group
Yeah.
reading some work on moral philosophy
Okay.
by Scanlon, who was also associated with Sen, and the common denominator
Yes,
is
Thomas Scanlon.
that's right, Thomas Scanlon.
Right.
So that's what we have been reading in this. We just started that group with Flavio,
Ah,
what
okay.
we owe to each other.
Each other, right.
Yeah. So we've just started this. It's quite not a totally easy read, but it kind of comes back to your question, what is a primitive reasoning? And it starts with what are the grounds for reasoning that one could call, let's say, a moral reasoning to establish what do we mean when we talk about welfare? So, which would be something like promoting good or preventing bad, or increasing aggregate good or decreasing aggregate bad, when we may have different preferences, right? Which might lead. So what Professor Patanaikis is talking about, primitive reasoning, is referred to in this long exchange, which goes back. And I remembered also this very old book that had been gathering dust by Professor Sen and Williams, which had a lot of very seminal articles in it, which are kind of in our canon, but we don't remember that they came from the same collection of essays including John Elster's piece on sour grapes. There are quite a number of different. So Scanlon's position is a political, philosophical position that's also sociological rather than economic as such. But it's this topic that we touch on around the edges of this group, which is what was beyond utilitarianism that led Sen to engage with utilitarianism and to engage with Arrow as well in the question of how do we decide whether collective welfare can be decided when we have individuals which maybe have different preferences and if you think of them in a strictly utilitarian way, they may prefer all kinds of things that are not particularly nice for other people. And that might not also add up in a way that makes sense. So what Professor Pasternak is talking about, what makes sense when you add it all up, like smoking in a crowded room. So somebody might enjoy smoking and want to smoke, and that's their preference. But then, we have all sorts of other understandings that we know that smoking is very harmful for people, and also that secondhand smoking is much more harmful than firsthand smoking, which of course makes, smoking in a crowded room even worse but how can you, deal with that when there are some different different interpretations of what the preference really means. Yeah. So there's a kind of like a connection to moral philosophy.
Okay.
And whether that could be justified in some sort of procedural or processual way, or whether it could be justified in what Professor Paternet calls a primitive way, which could be like a self-evident fact. So Scanlon's kind of against that, right? He says that one shouldn't just do it that way, but we could maybe rely on what seems to be psychologically, true, because we really believe that, or feel that, or what might be, empirically true because you can observe that, for example, smoking being very dangerous for people. So I just wanted to interrupt and fill the space, but I see Professor Paternek is back with his reference, so let's find out about that anyway.
No, I'm sorry, I couldn't trace the book. But the basic point is there are these two things as we are talking just now. The two things are getting continuously intermixed. That bothers me a lot. Anytime let me point out, on several occasions, I have expressed my reservations about the functioning and capability approach. Why? The reason is interpersonal comparison is absolutely necessary if we want to do anything in this area. If I can't compare the well-being of individuals or the change in well-being of individuals, what sort of welfare economics can I do? Anytime people well-being differs, if I can't even decide whether it is identical or different, if I can't even don't have any procedure, what can I do? Now, as soon as you raise this question, immediately sometimes there comes an easy answer. People are sometimes bringing up, okay, we shall take a vote and therefore whatever the majority decides, we shall go by that. That's no answer. It may be a very difficult problem. We may have to break our head, torture our brain over this, but this is no answer to that problem. And as yet, we don't have a satisfactory answer to that question. And the reason is simple. We can compare happiness because happiness has the notion of happiness or preference satisfaction has an empirical content, in descriptive content. A person is happy or unhappy. I'm not saying the person is good or bad. I'm saying the person is happy or unhappy. That is a descriptive content of what happiness is. Therefore, if you say I can compare happiness, yes, psychologists do compare happiness, but that's because it has descriptive content. Whereas we are not talking about descriptive content, we are saying that, okay, these are the things that I value. What's the total value I attach to the functioning bundle, and what's the total value that you attach to the same functioning bundle? There is no way of empirically verifying it. Therefore, at the present stage of our knowledge, we have absolutely no way of comparing in the functional capability approach how does the well-being of this person compare with the well-being of that person? Until we have some agreement about that, there is no way of proceeding any further. How can I proceed with an approach which cannot compare the well-being of two different persons? Because in principle, there is no known method of whether it is a psychologist or whether it is an economist. There is no empirical way of comparing this. And we may be able to compare the value attached, but nobody has done that so far. And yet, when answering this question, people are frequently answering, we shall go by the consensus. Now, suppose there is a consensus in a society that we shall massacre all. The consensus meaning 95% of people think that there are 5% of people who don't conform to our religious belief, therefore we shall massacre them. Now, are we going to go by that just because there is a democratic decision method and that overwhelmingly says, yes, massacre them? We have to give primitive reasoning there. How do I justify massacring 5% or 10% of the minority population, whether it is country A or B or C? If the same question arises, I have to give my independent reasoning. Why am I saying I shall go by majority opinion? Majority opinion is not the ultimate thing. We have
So
seen
can we
majority
just
is
go
going
back down to the
wide.
bottom, Professor,
Pardon?
of can we just go back down to the bottom of primitive reasoning then? Why is it wrong to massacre people? So obviously you could say
Exactly.
that in primitive reasoning it is kind of somehow self-evidently the case that killing people is wrong.
Psychological explanation that we think so, just my thinking so doesn't give a justification. Now consider
So where what's the ground that primitivism comes from?
the ground. We probably have not found a ground, satisfactory philosophical ground. People have argued about it for ages. That how do I reason about value judgments? But we still continue to reason because it clarifies the things. I am very fond of, I probably mentioned in one of my lectures that I am very fond of T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. We shall basically the lines, the poem goes like this, that we shall continue to debate this, even though we are not gone much further, we have come back to the same place. But in the process of reasoning, we become clear.
Something like we'll return to the same place again. I can't
Yes,
quite remember the
we shall not
words.
cease from exploration, though the end of all our exploring will be to come back to the place where we started and know the place for the first time.
That's right. Yeah.
We shall continue to reason
I
because
really
it
like that.
clarifies the things. We don't have a solution, but we don't have a solution doesn't mean that we shall stop our reasoning. It is a very sort of, I'm always surprised by how people do that, that whenever there is no solution, we have found clear-cut solution, immediately they resort to majority decision or consensus or something. We have to do something in the society. And therefore, we have to take some decision procedure. But that itself, that there is a consensus, that itself is no justification for my saying that this is bad. The philosopher, sorry, I shall stop here. I have
No, no, no,
tendency.
no. No, no, Professor Subramanian, still I have sent him several emails, but
Oh,
there is no response,
he has some
unfortunately.
difficulty. I'm sure he has some difficulty because he's such a consensus person. He would probably, normally he would be ready about at least 1 hour before anything happens.
Yes, yes.
So he has some serious difficulty, I'm sure.
Could be just a time zone confusion, no?
No, I have
There's no
clarified that.
difference. Time. Okay.
Because he is in Delhi now.
Okay.
So last time, just day before yesterday, we have exchange of emails, several emails. Then I have specifically cleared that Delhi is, we are Dhaka, half an hour ahead of Delhi. So
perhaps we could discuss our interest in inequality.
yes,
Or inequality
actually,
measurement.
he already shared with me his PowerPoint presentation. Actually, he's quite ready for his, and he shared the reading list.
Yeah, I
And
saw it,
I
but I
have,
didn't really read anything on it.
yes,
Yeah, so it was
but
very well prepared.
yes, and he
So I think,
also shared his presentation with me earlier.
I'm completely sure that he has thoroughly prepared for it. Everything is ready at least a week before.
Yes,
I'm sure.
yes.
He's that sort of
Actually,
person. Therefore, it can't be any small reason because of which he is not here. It must be a
yes,
very serious reason because of which he is not
yes,
here.
yes, yes. That is true.
and also, Ronnie, I do believe that you have been very conscientious in making sure that the professor was well prepared and warned and told about the arrangements and that they had been tested and so on. I
Yes,
totally trust that, that you had
yes,
made big efforts to make sure that everything would be okay for the session. So as
yes.
Professor Patanek says, I think it's kind of we're
Mm,
a bit worrying really what's happened. Um,
yes.
Javed's preparations are absolutely flawless.
he's a
I
very
have never
caring
seen.
person and really cares so much for everyone in the group to be able to join properly.
Yeah.
And even when I wasn't able to join or anyone can't join, he always makes sure we get the slides afterwards, the recording links and the reading list and so on. So that's very much appreciated because of course I
I don't
couldn't
want to
join.
embarrass Javed by talking about him too much. But I
I
didn't
think
know
he's blushing, seeing the top of his head.
I didn't know anything about Zoom. He coached me. He gave me advice. Until now, I can participate in the Zoom meeting. I have not seen anybody doing that for me earlier.
Right. So, Professor Patnaik, can we because uh, uh, can we think of any alternative right now? Because since up to now we have not exposed such situations before, so can we make decisions? I think if we could if we could share our views on inequalities, since this is the inequality discussion and on the measurement of inequality here, so can we share our discussions on inequality, because in such point we cannot request someone to give an entire lecture on some topic. This would be so embarrassing. So what can be done, alternatively? What can we do in such situation, Professor Patnaik?
In in what situation?
In the current situation that our speaker,
Oh, okay.
designated speaker, is not here, and we are not prepared for such
Oh,
situation.
okay. Okay.
So
Now you
what
may
can
like
be
to
done?
you raise some issues you may like to discuss, not about inequality as such, but you had some questions which you may like to discuss with the participants. You raised the question of should we try to bring out a book on this, on the basis
Yes.
of this. That is one
Yes,
of the
yes.
things about which participants may have some opinion. You may like to talk about that, or
Yes, yes.
you.
Actually, since we are we are about to close our sessions. We have actually, for this study circle, it took more than 3 years to reach today's point of time, because it must be clear that I got the privilege of working under Professor Patnaik sir, and I learned a lot from him. And actually, this study circle title, every topic sessions, all he has set, and this whole preparation is actually directed by him. So, so after implementing such well-planned lecture plan, what we used to call, raise. I don't know how the hand raised. So, the lecture plan that we have prepared, and we have almost implemented all the sessions. So I was thinking that how we could share our discussions into a more in the next level, how we could organize it. Like if we think we could bring up a book or something like that, where we could think more clearly, more explicitly on the issues we have listened to and to participate, and we sometimes we agree, sometimes we do not agree, but what could be done in the next level, since we are about to close our sessions? This was my question actually. So did you hear my question? So do you think that in the next level, if we could take an initiative to bring out a book which will hold, or which will explicitly pose all the concerns and the questions that we have raised? Subramaniam sir just came. Professor Subramanian.
Hello.
Hello. We are waiting for you. Are you all right?
I can't hear you very well. You're writing stuff. Script.
Can you hear me now?
Slightly better. I'm also trying to get the...
but your voice is clear to us.
Okay. It's not that your voice is not clear. It's that my ears are not so good.
Okay.
Let me see. Is there a script? That's coming. Okay.
Okay. So,
what is this thing called?
Actually, we are waiting for you, and we are actually worried that is something went any wrong.
No, nothing went wrong. It's just that I thought that the meeting started at 9:30 Indian Standard Time, which is 9 o'clock your time. So I was waiting till 9:30 until I saw your email. And my young friend here is sitting right next to me. He's helping me out with this right now.
Okay,
No
okay.
problem. Okay.
Okay. Oh, all right. But our 9 p.m. is your 8:30 p.m.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Actually,
Okay.
I have mentioned that because when you wrote to me 2 or 3 days ago, then you wrote 8:30, and then I wrote that your 8:30 refers to 9 p.m. at Dhaka time. So,
Okay. Okay, my mistake and my profound apologies to
no,
everybody. Please accept my apologies. I'm
no,
really
it's all
sorry
right.
about it.
We are
Yeah.
we all are waiting for you. So,
Okay.
so Professor Patnaik, sir, can you unmute and say hello to our
I am. Oh, hello, Subbu.
Hello, Prashant. My profound apologies to you. I
No,
got
no,
it
no.
wrong on the other side. I thought it was 9:30 our time when it should have been 8:30. I'm so
No,
sorry about having.
No, I was telling everybody you must have finished all your preparation a week before. So must be something completely different which has held you up. All your material must be ready at least a week before, I know.
Yeah.
So please,
right.
Thank you. That
I'll,
is very kind of you. Yeah.
maybe we can start now.
Yes.
Sure.
Professor Patnaik, sir, can I have some 3 or 4 minutes to say some introduction about him and the session?
Oh, please go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And though we are late, good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all. On behalf of Banglar Pathshala Foundation, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to session 12 of Individual Wellbeing and Social Welfare Study Circle. This evening marks the final regular session of a journey that began several months ago, one sustained by shared curiosity, intellectual seriousness, and deep moral concern for questions of justice and human well-being. Let me begin by thanking each one of you, participants, discussants, friends, and well-wishers who have accompanied us through this long and demanding intellectual journey. Your continued presence, including this evening, reminds us that carefully patient conversations on welfare, inequality, and justice still matter profoundly, even in a world often dominated by haste, noise, and distraction. Over the past months, the IWSW Study Circle has been a collective intellectual endeavor grounded in rigorous inquiry, respectful disagreement, and a shared commitment to understanding how ethical ideas intersect with lived realities, social structures, and public policy. From the very beginning, this series sought not merely to discuss concepts in abstraction, but to think seriously about how ideas travel into institutions, measurements, and moral responsibilities. At its heart, this welfare study circle was conceived as a space for slow thinking, a place where questions could be examined with care, where disagreements could be held respectfully, and where normative concerns were never treated as secondary. Throughout this series, we have returned again and again to fundamental three questions. How should we think about welfare? What does justice require in deeply unequal societies? How do measurement, ethics, and public policy speak to one another? Tonight's session speaks directly and powerfully to these enduring concerns. Before turning to today's lecture, I must pause to acknowledge with deep gratitude and admiration the extraordinary intellectual labor and moral commitment of the convener of the study circle, Professor Dr. Prashant Kumar Patnaik, a stalwart scholar from the University of California, Riverside, and one of the most influential figures in contemporary social choice theory and welfare economics, widely regarded as the most consequential voice in the field after Professor Amartya Sen. From the very beginning, the IWSW study circle has borne the unmistakable imprint of his vision. It was he who proposed the very title of the study circle. It was he who carefully designed the intellectual arc of the series, thoughtfully shaping each session's theme. And it was he who, with remarkable generosity and precision, suggested the most appropriate speakers for each topic, always guided by intellectual coherence, ethical seriousness, and pedagogical care. This study circle is, in a very real sense, a testament of his quiet but sustained stewardship. On behalf of Banglar Pathshala Foundation and on behalf of all participants, I offer him our profound thanks for his guidance, his patience, his unwavering commitment to serious thinking about social welfare and justice. It is now my great honor to introduce our speaker for this evening. We are deeply privileged to have with us Professor Sreenivasan Subramanian, who will speak on some considerations relating to the measurement and mitigation of inequality. Professor Subramanian is a former National Fellow of the Indian Council of Social Science Research and a former professor at the MIDS, Madras Institute of Development Studies. He is an elected Fellow of Human Development Capability Association, HDCA. His scholarly work spans poverty and inequality measurement, welfare economics, collective choice theory, and development economics. His research has appeared in leading journals including Journal of Development Economics, Economics and Philosophy, Social Choice and Welfare, Theory and Decision, Mathematical Social Sciences, Shankho, and Economic and Political Weekly, EPW. He is the author of several important books, including The Poverty Line, Inequality and Poverty, A Short Critical Introduction, and Social Values and Social Indicators, among others. He was also a member of a World Bank appointed commission on global poverty under the chairmanship of the late Sir Tony Atkinson. What makes Professor Subramanian's work especially valuable for us is that it never treats inequality as a merely technical problem. His scholarship consistently reminds us that how we measure inequality is inseparable from what we value, and that efforts to mitigate inequality must be grounded not only in statistical rigor, but also in ethical reasoning and social responsibility. In choosing these topics for our final regular session, we felt that it was particularly fitting. Inequality is measurement. Inequality, its measurement, its persistence, and its moral implications has been a recurring concern throughout this study circle. Tonight's lecture allows us to return to those questions one last time with clarity, depth, and humility. Allow me to situate this session briefly within the broader arc of our journey. We were profoundly honored that this study circle was inaugurated on September 6, 2025 by Nobel laureate Professor Amartya Sen, who graciously joined us via Zoom despite serious health challenges. His presence, wisdom, and generosity set the ethical and intellectual tone for everything that followed. As we now move toward the conclusion of the series, we are equally grateful that the closing ceremony to be held on February 27, 2026 will feature Professor Martha Nussbaum, who has kindly agreed to deliver keynote address on justice for animals, extending the capabilities approach to non-human beings. Together, these moments frame our collective work within a broad and humane vision of justice. But for now, our task is clear: to listen carefully, to think together, and to engage seriously with the reflections offered this evening. Professor Subramanian, we are deeply grateful to you for your generosity in sharing our time, thought, and wisdom with us. It is a great honor to have you with us. With this, it is my privilege to invite Professor Sreenivasan Subramanian, to deliver today's lecture. Professor Subramanian, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Well, I must begin with two statements, one of thanks and one of apology. Thank you very much indeed for your very kind introduction. It recalled to mind what P.G. Wodehouse once said. That's not me, that's a couple of other chaps. And I must also say I'm so sorry that I've had to make all of you wait. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes. Your sound is clear, right?
Fine.
Should I share your
I knew
PowerPoint?
that there was.
Should I share your PowerPoint that you have sent me earlier?
Please. Yes, please. Okay. I should explain. I knew that there was a half hour between Dhaka and Chennai, but I got it on the wrong side. I thought 9:30 here would be 9 o'clock there when it should have been 8:30. So I'm sorry about that.
No problem, sir.
Okay, so having said that, let me now get on with my presentation. The basic proposition here is a rather simple one. When we measure social indicators or development indicators, it would be nice if the way in which we actually measure these indicators, and it could be an indicator like inequality or poverty or illiteracy or unemployment or the weight of women in a population or the agedness of a population. It would be any one of these. It would be nice if the way in which we measure these phenomena also enable us to address the question of how we might engage in some betterment or amelioration of the conditions which are reflected by these real valued measures. And so too in the case of inequality. Now, one of the most widely used measures of income or wealth inequality is what we all know of as the Gini coefficient. It's not by any manner of means the only real valued measure which has been pressed into service, but it is a major workhorse in the industry of measuring inequality. There are also other measures such as the variance, the squared coefficient of variance, Theil's entropy indices, the Atkinson indices, and so on. Now, a feature which all of these indices have in common with each other is that all of them take stock of the distribution which is being studied and whose inequality is sought to be appraised in its entirety. Now, we also have a different sort of measure of the type which was popularized mainly by the work of economists such as Atkinson, Piketty, Sayers, Chancel, Alvarado, and so on, which consists in getting a sense of the inequality of an income distribution in terms of what are called top incomes, namely the income share of the richest 1% or of the richest 0.1%, or sometimes if you're sufficiently fine-grained, even the income share of the richest 0.01%. Or you have measures which focus their attention not just on the upper tail, but on the lower tail as well of a distribution. And a very well-known index in this regard, which has threatened actually to supplant the more commonly used indices, such as the Gini coefficient, is what is called the Palma index, which is due, not surprisingly, to Jose Gabriel Palma. And his measure is quite simply the ratio of the income share of the richest 10% of a population to the income share of the bottom 40% of the population. Now, one reason which Palma advances for concentrating on the two extremes is that it seems to be a widely observed empirical regularity that the income share of the middle 50% of a population has tended to be roughly stable, whether we're talking about a single country over time or different countries at a given point of time. So both cross-section and time series data seem to suggest this sort of stability. Now, what I'm not going to be concerned with is any sort of serious scrutiny of the merits of these two kinds of measures. The first kind of measure which takes into account the entire distribution is what one might call, for convenience, an across-the-board measure of inequality. And those indices which concentrate on the upper or on the upper and lower tails of a distribution, or what one might call tail-ender measures of inequality. So it is not going to be my intention to deal with any degree of carefulness with the supposed virtues and deficiencies of these two sets of measures. As it happens, there are others who have spoken in this context. For example, Branko Milanovic is not particularly enamored by the Palma ratio, whereas other commentators like let me recall his name. Schlogel, Sumner, and so on, have found the Palma index to be particularly attractive. Now, as I said, measures like the Gini, which are essentially across-the-board indices, take account of the entire distribution, while what you have going for these tail-ender indices is what Atkinson, Piketty, and Sayers say, and I quote, "People have a sense of fairness and care about the distribution of economic resources across individuals in society. This is reflected in the view that, quote, all advanced economies have set in place redistributive policies such as taxation, and in particular progressive taxation and transfer programs, which effectively redistribute a significant share of national product across income groups." Okay. So when we talk of these tail-ender measures, we have a more or less explicit concern with issues relating to taxation and redistribution from a policy point of view, and from economic justice from a broader philosophical or normative point of view. Now, I therefore personally do not find it particularly productive to set one kind of index off against another. Okay. And as The name I was searching for was Cobham. My apologies. Cobham, Schlegel, and Sumner. And Cobham et al. Say that one may conclude that no single measure is likely to meet every concern. Okay. So given that that is so obviously true, it occurs to one to suggest that there is a case for plurality in the use of these different types of measures. And that immediately raises the question, plurality in what sense? In one sense of the word plurality, one could give statistics on each of these measures, okay, which can at times become a little confusing, especially when they happen to conflict with each other in their pairwise judgments of distributions. Or another form of plurality would be to seek to combine some of these indices in a composite measure. And of course, a disadvantage with that is that the very process of aggregation can result in a certain loss of information. But since that is the nature of the beast, and since that is in the nature of things, there is not an awful lot that we can do about it, and must therefore be reconciled to these problems with real valued measures of inequality. What I myself will propose to do in this presentation is to try and combine a representative measure from the across the board type of measures with a representative measure from the tail ender class of measures into one composite measure. And the specific representative measures that I have in mind of the first type are the Gini coefficient, and of the second type, a measure which one might call the income gap ratio, or R for short. Now, if we can move on to the next slide, please. The next one, please. Yes. So I do not propose to be very formal in this presentation, but a little bit of this is unavoidable. So essentially what I will be dealing with are what are called ordered income vectors. So bold X, which is represented by a list or a vector x1, x2, x3, xi up to xn, is an n vector where the typical element x subscript I represents the income of the ith poorest person. So this is an ordered income vector, and that's why I say the ith poorest person. So x1 is the poorest person in this vector, and xn is the richest person. Now, for every x of this nature, n of x is the dimensionality of x, namely the number of individuals who are represented in the income vector, and mu of x is the simple average income. And where there is no ambiguity, I shall suppress the x and therefore also loosen up the notational clogging. Okay. And although that is not going to make much sense to you, I might as well put down the standard formula for the Gini coefficient G, which is given by that expression, n plus 1 by n minus 2 over n squared mu times sigma I going from 1 to n of n plus 1 minus I times xi. And now the point to note here is that the Gini coefficient is derived from what is called a border rank order weighting of incomes. So if incomes from bottom to top are weighted according to the proportion of the population which has higher income than each of these incomes, then you will immediately see that a smaller income receives a higher weight than a larger income. And that is what induces the sense of equity in the measure of inequality that you're using. Now, the tail ender measure that I employ will be, again, a very simple one, which simply assesses the extent to which the average income of a society falls short in proportionate terms from the richest person's income. So in terms of the notation that I've employed, if mu is average income and if x subscript n is the income of the richest person, then R, the income gap ratio, is just 1 minus mu by xn. And the reason I present these two indices is that the measure which I will propose now will be a composite index which incorporates these two indices, namely G and R. Now, what is the way towards deriving this index? Next slide, please. Yeah. What I propose to do is to exploit a very well-known index of poverty, which is known as the Shorrock-Sen-Thorne Poverty Index. In fact, what I've done is to almost entirely steal that index. I've done nothing original here, except for one small variation. What the Shorrock-Sen-Thorne Poverty Index does is to aggregate the incomes of the poor in any society into a real valued measure of poverty. And the poor are defined as those with incomes less than a poverty line. So a poverty line is simply that level of income such that those with incomes less than the poverty line are certified as being poor. Okay. And it is customary to designate the poverty line by the symbol Z. Okay. So what the Sen-Shorrock's Thorne Poverty Index does is it takes the proportionate shortfall of each person's income from the poverty line. That is Z minus Xi divided by Z. So you start with the poorest person, Z minus X1 by Z, Z minus X2 by Z, Z minus X3 by Z, and so on. And you cumulate these shortfalls, okay? Now, what I do is simply to replace this poverty line Z by the income of the richest person, X subscript N. Okay. And this gives me these two quantities. There is small d subscript I, okay, which is the proportionate shortfall of the ith poorest person's income from the richest person's income. So d subscript I is xn minus xi divided by I for every I going from 1 to n. From there, I proceed to capital D subscript I, which is just these cumulations of these proportionate shortfalls. So capital D1 will be xn minus x1 by x1. Capital D2 will be xn minus x1 by x1 plus xn minus x2 by x2 by xn. Capital D subscript 3 will be xn minus x1 by xn plus xn minus x2 by x2 plus xn minus x3 by x3, and so on. I'm sure you will have got the general idea by now. Now, what I call a relative deprivation or inequality curve is just a plot of capital D subscript I against the cumulative share in population arranged in increasing order of income. Okay. And you can easily see that if I take these points and join them by straight lines, I will get what is called a piecewise linear curve, which is increasing and concave. Okay, that's the one. If the number of observations n, if the dimensionality of n is very large, then these linear segments will come closer and closer to each other, and we will get a continuous curve of the type that I have drawn here. Okay, so the inequality profile will just be this increasing, strictly concave curve. Now, it's not very difficult to see that the case of complete concentration of income is one in which every person other than the richest person has zero income, and the richest person has all of that income, all of the income of the society, in which case that curve, the inequality profile, will be represented by the diagonal of the unit square, which is represented in this figure by the dotted line. Okay. Now, without going into deep formalities and so on, I think it should be intuitively obvious that a reasonable real valued measure of poverty would be given by the area under the inequality profile. You see, the closer the inequality profile is to the diagonal, the more unequal, obviously, the distribution is. So the area under the inequality profile is some clear indication of the extent of inequality. And when that is divided by the maximum such area, which is the area beneath the diagonal, which is 1/2, as you can see, then you get a proper real valued measure of inequality, which I shall call capital D. So capital D is just twice the area underneath the inequality profile. And if you draw a piecewise linear curve, the area under the inequality profile can be derived by means of what is called the trapezoidal approximation method, which consists in summing up the areas of a number of rectangles and triangles, which is essentially a tedious but simple job in algebra. And without going into all of that, I can state the result quite simply, as in the next slide, please. I think the one before that, maybe. Oh, yes, that's the one. I'm sorry. You were perfectly right. So for large values of n, namely for a continuous kind of profile of the type that I've drawn, what you will find is that the value of this inequality measure D is a composite of R, which, to recall, is 1 minus mu by xn, namely the proportionate shortfall of the average income of the population from the richest person's income, plus a weighted value of the overall Gini coefficient, weighted by the quantity 1 minus R. Okay. Now, this should come as no surprise to somebody like Professor Patnaik, who is very familiar with the Sen index of poverty, which would be given by I plus 1 minus I times G star, where I is the income gap ratio, namely the proportionate shortfall of the average income of the poor from the poverty line, and G star is the Gini coefficient in the distribution of poor incomes. But since Z, the poverty line, has now been replaced by Xn, which is the income of the richest person, the headcount ratio here will be 1, okay? Because everybody has an income, nobody has an income exceeding the richest person's income. So the number of poor persons will be n, okay? And so the headcount ratio H in the Sen index formula will be replaced by 1, by unity. I will be replaced by R. The average income of the poor here is just the average income of the entire population, which is mu. And the headcount and the poverty line is xn. So R is just xn minus mu divided by xn. And G star, which was the Gini coefficient of inequality in the distribution of poor incomes in the Sen index, is now the Gini coefficient of inequality for the entire distribution, because if we treat xn as a relative poverty line, then the population in question is the entire population. And therefore, G is the Gini coefficient of the entire distribution. Now, a final comment I'd like to make is the following one. Professor Sen says of the Sen index of poverty that if you replace Z, the poverty line, by mu, the average income, and if you replace Q, the number of poor people, by N, which is the total population, then instead of the Sen index S, you will get the Gini coefficient of inequality. Now, that is, of course, literally undeniable as an arithmetical fact. But one difficulty out there that I perceive, and I might be wrong, is that if everybody is to be poor in a situation where the poverty line is mu, the average income, then under the weak definition of the poor, everybody would have to have a below mean income, which is not possible. Or if we use the strong definition of the poor, namely a poor person is one whose income does not exceed the poverty line, then in a situation where the poverty line is the average income and everybody is poor, that would mean that everybody has the mean income, and that degenerates to the special case in which the Gini coefficient is 0. But if you treat the relative poverty line as xn, then by definition, everybody under the strong definition is poor. Therefore, H will be equal to 1. The average income of the poor will just be the average income of the entire population, and the Gini coefficient of the poor will be the Gini coefficient of the entire population. And that will lead to this formula D equals R plus 1 minus R times G. Now, this is so simple. It appears to me that it has been hiding in plain sight. Either that is true, or I've got something seriously wrong, and I'm hoping you'll tell me if that is the case, because I can't imagine that one can get an inequality index which is quite as simple as this one. Now, some properties of the index D, I will skip over this quite quickly. It satisfies some well-known canonical properties of inequality, such as symmetry, normalization, continuity, transfer, and scale and replication invariance. So it seems, on the face of it, to tick all the right boxes. Now, one feature of this index, which is equal to R plus 1 minus R times G, is that it is a function clearly of both R and G, and it is an increasing function of each of these constituent measures. Now, there can be situations in which the Gini is unable to discriminate between two distributions, and other situations in which the R index is unable to discriminate between two distributions. And I give an example of that in that small table out there. I have three distributions, X, Y, Z. For reasons of time, I will gloss over the precise content of those distributions, but merely indicate to you that there are situations in which Gini for X could be the same as Gini for Y, whereas the R measures for these two could be different. And Gini for Y can be different from Gini for Z, whereas the R measures could be the same. And one way of breaking the tie is to employ the composite measure D. Okay. If you use the composite measure D, then you will find that for each of these distributions, you get a different value of the composite measure D, which sometimes pronounces a judgment over pairwise distributions in the same way in which Gini does, and sometimes in the same way in which R does. Okay. Now, that is true in principle, and one can always construct simple numerical examples of this nature to show that you can have ties, and ties are sometimes broken in favor of one of these two indices and sometimes in favor of the other of these two indices. But what we are really interested in is distributions, empirical distributions, as they seem to obtain in a preponderance of cases in the world in which we live. How much time do I have, Ronnie bhai?
Actually, sir, you have 1 hour. So since you have started lately, so I think everybody is waiting to finish your lecture. So I think you take your time to explain this, and it does, we will not mind.
Okay.
So,
can I try and wind it up in the next 20 minutes or so? Will that be okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Half an hour, fine.
Okay. Thank you. So if you look at the next table, which basically is a summary of some results. The next slide, please. If I may have the next slide. Yeah. This is basically some aggregation which I have done from data in the World Inequality Lab. For different regions of the world as a whole, for East Asia, Europe, Latin America, Middle East and North Africa, or MENA, North America, Central Asia, South and Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. For each of these regions, and for 2 points in time, 1980 and 2020, I have some summary measures, values for the measures R, G, and D, where D is R plus 1 minus R times G. Now, you see, one difficulty is that we do not have information for any empirical distribution as a general rule on the richest person's income. Okay. So I have had to deal with a surrogate. I have taken the richest person's income to be the average income of the richest 1% of the population. Now, actually, this can be a severe underestimate because there is a fair amount of inequality in the distribution of incomes among the richest 1% or even 0.1%. But since it's the best that I can do, I will try and make do with it. Okay, right. Now, what we find is that the Gini coefficient shows a fair amount of variation in its value, both across space at a given point in time and over time for each region. So for example, if you look closely at this table, you will find that, for instance, Gini varies from 0.43 for Europe to as high as 0.75 for Middle East and North Africa in 1980, and from 0.48 for Europe to 0.72 for North America in 2020. And one can see a significant reduction in Gini for the MENA countries between 1980 and 2020, that is from 0.75 to 0.66, together with significant increases for North America from 0.45 to 0.57, for Central Asia from 0.57 to 0.63, and for South and Southeast Asia from 0.54 to 0.61. By contrast, you will find that the R measure for any region of the world at any given point of time is at least 0.9. And the D measure, which is R plus 1 minus R times D, is almost always close to its maximum value of 1. Okay. So you find a similar picture if you look at inequality in India. The next slide, please, which is again based on information which is available in by now very well-known paper by Bharti, Chancel, Piketty, and Somanchi. So you have data at 10-yearly intervals from 1952 to 2012. And if you look at the R values, again, there is very little discrimination. Likewise for the D values. But where G is concerned, you find a declining trend from 52 to 82 and an appreciable increasing trend from 82 to 2012. So this raises the question, are these measures like R and D essentially blunt instruments, which are not wholly reliable because they seem to be suggesting a diagnosis of extreme inequality or close to extreme inequality in virtually every case, whereas the Gini coefficient seems to be much more discriminating. So is this the lesson that we ought to draw from these numbers? Now, I would argue not quite. And again, I say this with some measure of tentativeness. Perhaps the fault is not with the measure D, but with the types of distributions whose inequality we are called upon to assess. After all, there can be nothing particularly right about a distribution where the average income of a society is barely 5% of the average income of the poorest, of the richest 0.1% of the population. If that's the kind of inequality that we are dealing with, ought we to be surprised that the measure is returning figures which are close to the extremes of inequality? And here, by way of a sort of a sociological comment, you see, these numbers are ones that we have sort of got accustomed to. They have become normalized over a period of time because we take it for granted that this is the sort of world in which we live. But I think there is a case for drawing a distinction between what is normal and what is common. And by way of example, anemia, for example, is not normal. It is a pathological condition. But it is not rendered normal by the fact that it might be a very common phenomenon, especially in less developed countries of the type that we inhabit. Okay. So again, I'm not going to go into any very great detail, but I would put it to you that one of the things that this suggests is, can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, the next one after that. Yes. If we plot the measure R, which is the shortfall of the average income of the population from the average income of the richest 0.1%, if we plot that against the income share of the richest 1%, you get a curve of that type, okay, which I've shown, which is very sharply increasing up to about an income share of 0.5% for the richest 0.1%. After that, it slows down, and after 0.1, it sort of almost flattens out. It crawls up towards the ceiling in an asymptotic fashion. And what does this suggest? I mean, the best way I can think of representing this is in terms of an old Tamil proverb, which says, to a drowning man, how does it really matter whether the water level is 1 yard or 1 foot above one's nose? If you're drowning, it doesn't really matter. So the resistance to extreme inequality is represented in a curve of that nature. If we can go on to the next, or the previous one, please. So I have 3 hypothetical distributions, A, B, and C. Distribution A is actually an imitation of the global distribution of income. So I take the global distribution of income to be approximated by the income shares of the poorest 500, the next poorest 400, the next 90, the next 9, and the richest person, in a total of 1,000 people. Okay. So the global distribution of income, which is the distribution A, is of this type. Each of the poorest 500 persons gets an amount of 14 cents. The next poorest 400 persons get a little less than $1, 95 cents. The next richest 90 persons get $3.78. The next 9 poorest persons get $13.97, and the income of the richest person is $84.30. So the income of the richest 0.1% is some 84 times the average income of the population. Now, that is the order of inequality that we are dealing with. Now, let us suppose that we have two other distributions which are available to us, which suggest a lower level of inequality. Distribution B is one in which we continue to retain the income of the richest person at $84.30, but we distribute the remaining income equally among the remaining 999 people, so that each of the poorest 999 persons receives an income of 92 cents and the richest person gets $84. Now, vis-a-vis distribution A, the Gini coefficient goes down. The Gini coefficient goes up, and I think there is an error out there. One moment, please. Okay. Right. Let's just look at the value of the D index. It goes down for distribution 1 from 0.9956 to 0.9091. Distribution C is a somewhat different one, okay, where what you notice basically is that in going from distribution B to distribution C, the bottom 50% fare a little worse in C than in B. The next 49.9% fare better. And the top income is reduced drastically from $84.30 to just $5, which makes the average income of the poorest 0.1% still 5 times the average income of the population as a whole. But if you compare distributions B and C, you will find that Gini for B is lower than Gini for C, whereas the R value for B is higher than the R value for C. So G and R, they rank the distributions B and C in opposing ways. And as it happens, the D index ranks these two distributions B and C in the same way in which the R index does. Okay. So there is some indication here that when we are dealing with extreme levels of inequality of the type that seem to be reflected in both regional, country-wise, and global distributions of income, then the measure R seems to influence the overall value of the measure D more strongly than the Gini coefficient does. And therefore, there might be a case for us to be guided by what is suggested by the R measure. And what the R measure suggests is that there is a strong case for capping top incomes. So what a measure such as D, which is a composite measure of G and R, seems to suggest in a general way is that there are certain situations in which we might wish to proceed with a ranking of distributions in the way in which Gini does, others in the way in which the measure R does. But in the generality of cases, given the sorts of extremely unequal distributions which the world, as it is presently constituted, seems to present us with, there might well be a case for being guided by the measure D, which is influenced overall more by R than by Gini, and which upholds essentially the, the advisability of capping top incomes. And that is, I will try and wind up in the next 6 or 7 minutes now. And that is compatible with a distributional ethic, which the philosopher Ingrid Robbins calls limitarianism. Limitarianism, she suggests, is an ethical or political view which is symmetrical in a certain sense to the view that there is a poverty line and that no one should fall below this line. Limitarianism claims that one can theoretically construct a richest line and that a world in which no one would be above the richest line would be a better world. And she has two rather elementary and intuitively appealing reasons for endorsing limitarianism. The first justification, to quote her, relates to democracy and the worry that massive inequalities in income and wealth undermine the value of democracy and the ideal of political equality in particular. I hope, given where some of us come from, that I don't have to elaborate on that. The second argument is predicated on the requirement of financial resources, presumably to be supplied by the super rich, in a world in which there are urgent unmet needs arising from at least one of three conditions: extreme global poverty, local or global disadvantages, and severe collective action problems. And all of which are held by Robbins, and reasonably so, to obtain in the world as we know it. Now, one approach to capping the incomes of the richest is what the philosopher Harry Frankfurt calls sufficientarianism, where he says that what we ought to be looking for is not perfect equality, but sufficiency. Namely, that inequality should not be tolerated in the sense and to the extent that inequality is compatible with some section of the population not having a sufficiency of resources in order to escape deprivation. So long as we are in a society where there is no deprivation, we shouldn't really be concerned with inequality. So in a society where we do have deprivation, one way of getting rid of the deprivation would be to have a tax and transfer system of the following type. You take the income of the richest person and bring it down to the income of the next richest person. If the income that you have collected thereby is sufficient to bridge the aggregate poverty gap, stop the exercise. If not, take the incomes of the two richest persons and bring those down to the income of the third richest person. If what you have collected is sufficient to bridge the poverty gap, stop. Otherwise, take the incomes of the three richest persons and bring them down to the income level of the fourth richest person. And you keep doing this until you arrive at that marginal level of income, say call it X star, at which the total tax collected is just sufficient to bridge the aggregate poverty gap. Now it can be shown that this tax transfer system, if you're interested in doing no more than in just wiping out poverty, this tax and transfer system cannot be Lorentz dominated by any other tax and transfer system. And this is a mechanism which is compatible with sufficientarianism. Although one does not have to confine oneself to sufficientarianism, one can cap the income at an even lower level. Cap the income of the poorest 0.1%, let us say for an R value of 0.8. Okay. So that the income of the richest 0.1% is, say, 20 times the income of the average income of the population. What you can do with this taxation is to have a direct income transfer program, or you can have a basic income program, or you can spend it on education and health, or whatever. But the important idea is to limit the incomes of the richest. Of course, there have been arguments against this. One well-known argument is that in the end, by limiting the incomes of the so-called richest, you might simply be immiserizing the population. You might just be creating poverty out of this. Now, I think this is an often misplaced argument because even in countries with large amounts of poverty, which is yours and mine, Ronnie, okay, are ones in which the concentration of especially wealth in the hands of the rich is so high that without any substantial damage to their interests, one can, to a fair extent, mitigate poverty by a simple system of taxation and redistribution of the type that I've shown. A second argument is that all taxation by definition is distortionary and has incentive effects, that it has deleterious effects on the incentives of the rich. To this, I would say that one is not advocating that the incomes of the rich be taxed and the proceeds of the tax be dumped in the ocean. We're saying transfer it to the poor. So if there are negative incentive effects for the rich, there will presumably be positive incentive effects for the poor. And in fact, our production curve is usually strictly concave. So it is likely that the positive incentive effects for the poor are, if anything, likely to outweigh the negative incentive effects for the rich. So I wouldn't go too far with textbook arguments of that nature. A third reason is that if you start taxing the rich, they will resort to avoidance, to evasion, and to tax competition and the flight of capital away from your country to some more favorable destination, such as the Cayman Islands. Now, my paper is not equipped to deal with these sorts of public finance issues, but I have noted that there is literature which is mentioned in my references, including by Cobham, who runs the Tax Justice Institute in the UK, arguing against too ready a submission to this view of the world. And in fact, Sayers and Zuckman, they say very tellingly that tax competition and avoidance and evasion, these are not necessarily truths of nature, which I mean, this is not like the law of gravity. We're not bound by these, and there are surely mechanisms which can be devised, not least through the display of a certain measure of political will and integrity to guard against this sort of tax competition. So let me simply conclude by suggesting that that considerations of both political morality and measurement endorse a certain type of limitarianism, especially in the world in which we live today, as a desirable ethic, distributional ethic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Subramanian. Actually, after the lecture, we usually take 5 to 7 minutes for speaker's rest and preparation for question answer session. I think we can start question answer session if you don't mind right away.
If I've exhausted you, we can take a break, but I'm all right.
No. Yeah, the presentation was so interesting and so illuminating because such measurements of in every aspect that we usually use in economics. So you have covered all those because from Palma, Gini to Palma and all those things. So I think, but limitarianism, Ingrid Romans, it is entirely new. I didn't know about this at all, honestly. So And there is a opposite view, a sufficientarianism.
Sufficientarianism.
Sufficientarianism. I didn't heard this before, so that is my limitation. So, so I think, can I request our convener, Professor Prashant Patnaik sir, to say some few words on the presentation. We will come back to you at the end, of course, but at the beginning, please say something on his presentation.
First, I would like to say how much I have enjoyed the lecture, especially since it is addressing some problems which is directly relevant to some of the economies in which I'm keenly interested. So I would like to express my admiration. I have one or two small questions. Now, this may look like emphasizing too much about the practical aspect at the expense of the analytical improvement, but let me nevertheless raise that. See, one of the things is we ethically justified something, but to what extent we can implement it in the context of especially the type of economies in which many of us live, that's a different issue. Now consider this notion of limiting the income, capping the income of the extreme rich. In principle, it may seem okay, but consider what it may involve. This resource has to be transferred in some way or other from the very rich, let's assume, to the very poor, either directly through some transfer system or indirectly through some sort of social care system by providing more education, health care, etc., which is likely to benefit the poor. But consider the system that we have inherited, for one reason or other, historically inherited. Consider India. The system that we have inherited, is it capable of handling this? Let me give you an example. We have the system of providing free lunch to small children up to a certain age, but I have been told, I am not very familiar with the actual situation, but those who are familiar with the actual situation, they're saying much of the resources that are being devoted to this are being siphoned off at the local level by the more powerful people, more rich. In other words, we are not going to implement a system in a framework where everybody is trying to implement what is morally right. It has to be implemented by people, and we know what sort of people we have, what sort of framework we have inherited historically, an administrative system and a political system where this type of quote unquote, though I'm using a rather antiseptic language, leakage. We could euphemistically call this sort of thing leakage, where leakage is so widespread. Can we trust our administrative system to make this enormous transfer? Even the moderate rate of transfer that we are trying to make, that is getting vitiated by so-called leakages at the local level. Can our administrative system and the political system handle this enormous transfer? That's one of the questions I would like to ask. Because I myself have seen, I did a very small bit of work on a village some time ago. I've seen myself what sort of leakage is taking place. I don't know about other economies so very well. Maybe Javed can tell us about the administrative system and the political system, to what extent it is capable of undertaking this massive amount of transfer without this sort of waste. So I have a rather some amount of fondness for the so-called Fabian socialism. When the Labour Party came to power, it didn't undertake to introduce a huge transport system. It did by bits and pieces, slowly, because slow sort of transformation is possible to handle. If you try to make a huge transfer, it will upset the present system, and as a result, a whole lot of resource may be wasted. So instead, they followed this bit and piece sort of approach. What would Professor Sreenivasan think about it? I'm wondering.
Right. Professor
Should I
Subramanian?
respond?
Yes. And then we will go for go to Professor Maurice Saleh if he want to say something.
Well, the last part of my presentation was an attempt actually to deal with Prashantada's question. And at some radical level, it is unanswerable. But can I pose the question in a slightly different fashion in order to elicit an answer with a slightly different complexion from the one that would be implied by the legitimate skepticism entertained about the practicality. I mean, it's very easy to talk about a lexicographic maximum transfer of income from the rich to the poor. I mean, it all works out beautifully in terms of the formalities of the problem. But how on earth are you going to do it? Now, I cannot talk about sufficient ways of doing it, but I can think of one necessary condition for the possibility of any such solution to emerge. And that necessary condition, in my view, would be one which is located in the context of what one might call a certain kind of professional responsibility. And here I would say that it would help, or at least not hinder the cause, if all economists were to speak in one voice and repeatedly about the absolute unacceptability of the kind of utterly perverse system that we are laboring under. Because after all, to advocate certain measures in a climate where it is favorable to do so is a very different proposition by advocating those measures in the context of a climate which is not receptive. And therefore, I would say that a non-receptive climate is all the more reason why there is cause for a certain amount of coordination. And it is not just skepticism. There is also, skepticism is something which can and should be worked out. I mean, for example, it is very hard to believe that now, but in the early 1980s, when M.G. Ramachandran in my state of Tamil Nadu actually talked about implementing a midday meal scheme in schools, and in fact, there was a precursor to that by Kamaraj, even in the 1950s, 60s. I mean, people said, what do you think you're doing? You're bankrupting the exchequer. This is completely unreal. Okay. This is not something which can possibly bear the imprint of any kind of practicality. And yet, 15 years after the event, we arrived at a situation where the Supreme Court actually issued an order to the effect that a midday meal scheme must be mandatory in every state of the Indian Union. So very often it's a question of persistence, of consistency, and the word I'm looking for really, I think, is relentlessness. Okay? And skepticism is something that we can sort out by talking. But where there is also vested interest, I mean, I've heard a very, very responsible and respected economist simply sneer at the notion of a wealth tax and ask a question such as, what are you suggesting? A communist revolution? Are you going to send a postcard to people to come and join you in a revolution? I mean, I think this sort of attitude is very far from being helpful. Okay. Uh, I mean, that's not what Prashantada is saying at all, but I'm characterizing the situation as it does obtain at a much larger level. I mean, we have extremely competent, supposedly responsible, uh, very knowledgeable economists who often do make these kinds of noises and therefore end up speaking for the politician and save the politician the necessity of even beginning to concern himself with the issue, which I think would be a different proposition if very many voices spoke up all the time and relentlessly. That's the only way I can think of addressing a problem like this. And unfortunately, with all its imperfections, a public distribution system, a midday meal scheme, a right to education, compulsory schooling, all of these, their imperfections, I think, require, they should elicit not the slogan, therefore let's dump it, but the slogan, it's got problems, so let's try and rectify these. And the odd voice here and there is not going to make a difference. What is needed is, as I said, I think it's what Professor Sen calls public action, in the broadest possible way, which has attached to it a connotation of consistency, relentlessness, and speaking in one voice. That's the best I can do.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I request Professor Maurice Saleh, please unmute and yes.
Can I see him?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Professor Saleh. How nice to see you.
Hi. Nice to see you too.
Right.
Well, I would like to say some word on the French situation. We have some people in France who are among the richest person in the world. And there has been a very active discussion on taxation by the use of some proposal by Zuckman. And I must say that it goes in the way that Professor Subramanian said. I believe that it has been rejected at this time, but I think that it will probably be accepted in the future, because now some people are used to it, and even among the richest people in France, some are ready to pay the Zuckman tax. So maybe one day the redistribution will be possible. Well, in France at least, but I think everywhere.
With some help from all of us, maybe.
Well, I have just a very particular question. I was surprised in the statistics that there was a group of Middle East and North Africa. It's not very homogeneous because in Algeria, Tunisia, Libya,
yes,
it's not to be compared with Arabia, Saudi Arabia, or
very true.
the
Very
Emirates.
true. Yeah. Yeah.
It's,
That's what tends to happen when we think of certain regions as being composed of odds and ends, which can just be
yes,
indifferently lumped together.
yes.
I agree.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Thank,
much.
thank you. May I request Raphael to
Thanks. So my question is just it's just small one. The sense index of poverty includes G star among the inequality of Gini inequality among the poor. Um, would it be meaningful to set up a poverty index with a poverty focus as an axiom, and include the Gini index for the whole population instead of including just the Gini index for among the poor? Would it be like meaningful and yes, meaningful in this sense or not? Because there's no compatibility between the poverty focus and the Gini index for the whole population of a society. Was I clear? Was my question clear?
Not entirely clear, because your voice was breaking, and what
Oh,
has helped me
just
all along was the
I,
script.
I apologize.
Uh,
So I'll try to, if I have the Gini index, the sense poverty index, right? And I substitute and I replace the Gini
yeah,
index for among the poor with the Gini index or for the whole population,
yeah,
knowing that the sense poverty index uses a poverty focus. Would
yeah.
this
Okay,
still be a meaningful and compatible, a meaningful way
yeah,
of describing poverty? Because the poverty focus may clash with the Gini
yeah,
index among the whole population.
yeah,
This is just my question.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I'm beginning to see what you're saying. Uh, you see, what I'm doing is essentially, and I don't know how permissible this is, I'm arguing by analogy with the poverty index. In the context of the index which I advance, there is clearly no role for a focus axiom because there is really no poverty line. It is as if one were being invited to see the richest person's income as the poverty line Z in standard analysis. It is an entirely as if question without substantive meaning in the context of the index. And if
So
one does that,
may I
then
interrupt?
one ends up not just with one overall across the board index, in this case the Gini, but an additional term which also reflects uh, some element of a tail end of sort of interpretation of a measure of inequality. So, in and of itself, it would be inappropriate to call the richest person's income a poverty line because we're not really discussing poverty. But in a formal sense, to enable comprehension through analogy, it is as if one were to replace Z by X subscript N. And the resulting profile can, with justice, I think, and without too much semantic fussiness, can be called a relative deprivation or inequality profile,
Thank you, but
from
probably
which, therefore, I think it might be justifiable to derive a real valued measure of the type that I have done.
thank you. Just
I
my
hope that's
probably
the best I
yeah.
can do. Yeah,
Yeah, no, because I didn't explain myself very well. Leaving aside your index, so generally speaking, probably you already answered me. If I set up a sense poverty index with a G, not G star, but G for the whole population, would it be, just
yes,
generally speaking, would it be meaningful? Leaving aside your index, which doesn't have a poverty line, so the poverty line is income of the richest person. So leaving aside your index, if I if I want to apply sense index, may I modify or can I modify this index by introducing not G star but G for the whole population? I think you said yes. Definitely,
Precisely.
sir. Yeah.
Precisely.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you
The
very
G
much.
which I speak of is the Gini for the entire population.
Okay.
You're
Thank
right.
you. Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Rafael. So, may I ask Jahangir Iqbal, bhai, are you there? No, I think he's not in front of computer. Oh, Jahangir Iqbal bhai, please unmute. Can you unmute? Yes.
Yes.
If you have
Hello.
any question or comment, directly you can talk to Professor Subramanian.
From I am late come. I go to a place then and come now.
Oh, actually, he said that he did not attend the lecture entirely. He joined
I
late.
got that.
So okay,
That's fine.
okay, no problem, no problem. Sir, I have two questions actually. One is related to Professor Prashant Patnaik sir, what he posed, that leakage redistributive in the redistribution system, there is a leakage and there is an inappropriateness here also, I would add, because in Dhaka city there is no in Bangladesh, there is no Dhaka city, there is no social safety support, that is packages that support poor for their basic commodities, so at a subsidized price. So only exception is TCB's Truxell. Truxell used to use and that TCB truck has some 5 or 7 fundamental basic goods. They actually stand near slum areas or in a in lower income populated area they situate. So there I see that some of the people who are above that line used to take illegally that package, but the package was not meant for them. It was meant for much lower income holders, but people who are actually connected to the distributors people, and they are in a relationship or they are in a connection, and then they sell it to them, so which is completely illegal or undue advantage. So that is one thing that that is things are going to inappropriate persons. And another thing I would like to mention here, while we are discussing on inequalities, but one of the heart-rending event happened in near Minneapolis, I think. A 37-year-old woman was shot dead by ICE police. And actually, it was so, actually what Trump wanted to do is there are Somalian people living in that area, probably. And Trump actually said that they are garbage people. Somalian people are garbage people. And then he tried to get rid of them. And then a woman protests that IC used to harass who are non-white. And then when the police shot dead, police shoot 3 times, 3 bullets to the woman, and she on the spot, she was on the car and she died. And then US government claimed that the lady, the policeman ordered her to stop and he will arrest her, while saying that the lady wants to run away with the car, and he was about to kill the policeman with the car. But in the fact, when people analyzed the video footage, then found out that no, that is not the case. The police is bit far away to the car, and the car was not approaching to drive over him. So government's claim was not true. So we are talking about inequality, how to reduce from stark inequality to a considerable level. But here the people's life is not secure. People are dying because of discriminatory attitudes, which are not measured, which is also inequality, of course. But in economic inequality, we do not measure such that the policeman is shooting to a lady while her human rights, she has full right to oppose or question any of the state's decisions. So I don't know. Maybe I'm irrelevant for this today's discussion, but these 2 things came in my mind.
Well, yes, I sympathize with your question. I mean, there are clearly very many different kinds of inequalities. What I was specifically dealing with is economic inequality, because I'm just a little bit more qualified to talk about that than about other types of inequality. Not that they do not impinge themselves on one's consciousness on an almost daily basis. But having said that, it's also quite clear whether we are talking about human rights oppressions across the board within the city of Minneapolis, or what is happening in Gaza, or in Iran, or in Russia. In all of these cases, is it really so surprising that the bulk of the oppression is coming from those who are economically most powerful? Or indeed, that even in so-called free human rights respecting democratic countries, the governments which are elected to power get there very often simply because of the banking of the top 0.1% of the they're bankrolled. They're effectively bankrolled. And in terms, for example, of foreign policy, it's not going to matter the least bit whether the Republicans or the Democrats are in power in the US. I mean, ultimately, it's the corporates, it's the military-industrial complex. It is these entities which are going to dictate the course of events. And of course, at one level, it is at least a little ridiculous that we seek a lexicographic maximum solution as the antidote to these problems. But in a larger sense, I would still advocate the importance of a certain kind of unity and consistency in the professional voice that addresses these questions. And similarly, with your earlier remark about leakages, all kinds of leakages. There is corruption, outright corruption. There is thievery. There is inefficiency. There is negligence. And then there are these incentive problems of hidden information and hidden action, adverse selection, moral hazard. But despite all of these, I mean, the dice are loaded against you when you're actually setting out to cobble up the semblance of a social security system in a country. And yet, at the margin, having a food for work program, having something like MGNREGA in India, at the margin, it makes so much difference to the people who benefit from it. Yeah. And you recognize how important that is when it has been willfully destroyed and taken off the platter. You know? That's when you realize, that despite all the imperfections of thieving contractors, of delayed payments, of non-payments, despite all of these imperfections, in the end, not having it is so much more of a harm for those who benefit from it than having some very imperfect version of it.
Yes, I totally agree. Yes, of course. Professor Patnaik sir, I think you say something concluding words, and from myself, I wholeheartedly thank you for your presentation. And actually, you have touched all the aspects of the concern that we are discussing from session 1 to up to this. So this is a fulfilling moment, because with your such depth and encompassing lecture, we are concluding. I think our convener will say the concluding words. So,
thank you very much. That's very kind.
So, Professor Patnaik sir.
Well, I won't take too much of time. I would just like to make one or two remarks. First, I would like to say how delighted I am that Professor Subramanian could participate in this series of lectures. In fact, he is one of the few persons whom I would like to consult if I have some question about Indian poverty, inequality, issues like that. He's one of the few persons I would like to consult first to get his opinion, because he combines in a remarkable two different aspects of economics. One, the pure analytical part of it, and the second is also a concern about how we can apply it and things like that. We don't too often get that sort of rare combination of interest and ability. So I'm really glad that this is our concluding lecture was devoted to this topic, and we could get Professor Sreenivasan, Professor Subramanian to talk about it. And then I would like to, since this is the last regular session, I would like to say, I'm saying, I don't want to embarrass you, but it has been all possible because of your, if I may borrow the word from Professor Subramanian, because of your relentless devotion to this program. That has been made possible. Without your organizing ability, without your relentless devotion to promoting this intellectual adventure, we would not have had this program. Thank you very much.
Prashantara, thank you so
Namaskar.
very much. Please look
Thank
after
you.
yourself. And my thanks to you, Roni, bhai.
Yeah,
And
namaskar, sir.
Professor Sal, it was a real delight to see you. I had not expected to
Yes.
see you, so it was very nice to have seen Professor Sal as well.
Professor
To
Morris,
each of you, very many thanks.
say some words to Subramanian, sir.
Yeah, well, we just wrote emails yesterday.
Yes, exactly.
I think
We've just been talking to each other.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It
Thank you.
was a
Thank
pleasure
you.
to
Namaskar.
very
meet
much.
everyone.
Namaskar, sir. Namaskar. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I thank all the participants
really
who have participated actively and have contributed so much to the lecture series, all our participants.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It was a great time we have spent. Thank you, sir.